Welcome back to the Stepping In It podcast. We're excited to bring you a special series where we revisit some of our most impactful conversations that shed light on workplace mental health and the systemic changes needed to support employees, leaders, and organizations. Over the next few episodes, we're diving into strategies for creating healthier workplaces, improving access to mental health resources, and tackling the challenges that keep employees from getting the help and support that they need. You'll hear insights about how employee assistance programs, or EAPs, can unlock potential for mental wellness, a deep dive into rural mental health initiatives that are happening to help the rural communities, and the surprising ways that clutter can both clutter your physical and mental health, impacting your work. So, whether you're a leader looking for support for your team, an advocate for mental health access, or simply someone who's curious about improving workplace wellness, this series is for you. So, let's get into it.
Well, welcome back for another episode. How are you doing, Renee?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, it's the holidays and
Uh-oh.
everybody's around all of the time.
People came back from school, huh? And
Yeah.
they're just in your space.
They're just here, right? So that really cuts into the ability to focus and, get any real work products that take that separation and time and energy where I just need to get in the zone because there's just too much activity to get in the zone. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, you may have to find yourself like a temporary workspace or something if you actually have to focus on some abstracts or some proposals. You may have to get out of the house.
Ironically, I would go to the farm office and work, but there's so much stuff, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today, I think.
So much stuff. Yeah, we're talking about how clutter and more does not equal happiness, because this time of the year, I don't know about you, but I'm getting stuff. Are you getting stuff?
Yep,
All
there's
the
stuff.
holiday parties. Yeah.
Yep.
And more stuff sometimes doesn't equal happiness. And America, it's really fascinating. If you look into the idea of buying more stuff, came after World War I and II. They literally started creating advertising to tell Americans that we needed to buy stuff, because they wanted people that were returning from the war to go to work in factories to build stuff. But to be able to make that successful, people had to actually buy stuff. And so that's really when advertising took off, to tell all of us that we needed to get more things. And if we just had more things, we'd be happier and we'd have more stuff. And if you can see, the size of houses also changed after World War II started moving forward. So there was new cars, right? The automobile, everybody needed to have one, and nobody had one before, but they all needed them. And then it was the bigger house, and then it was all the things. And so this is all a big marketing ploy, and we became very consumer-centric in our country on purpose. It is a designed situation. Feel free to go read all about it. But what it's done is made some of us have way too much stuff. And the way we know we have too much stuff, do you know how many storage units there are in America? I don't think I have the number in front of me today, but it's in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of storage units. More than you have people are storage units. What is in the storage unit is what I want to know. That's why you have all those wonderful TV shows where they sell and auction off all of those amazing storage units full of crap, because people stuffed everything in storage. Not only did we buy bigger houses, it couldn't fit in that, so we put it more and more and more. And today we're going to talk about the fact that clutter equals anxiety. And there's lots and lots of research to back this up. And a lot of people don't think about this, but the more stuff you have, the more responsibilities you have. And the more responsibilities you have, the more resources it takes to maintain, the more costly it is to maintain it. It's a lot more work at a 3,000 square foot house than it is a 1,500 square foot house. And it just goes up incrementally above that. And it requires paying for housekeeping or all the things just to keep stuff going. So today we're going to talk about stuff. So Jason, talk to me about stuff. Where are you in life with stuff?
Well, I get decision fatigue when we start talking about stuff. And so this is where I struggle with this conversation, Renee, because I might be one of those folks who keeps a few too many things. And so that's a challenge. I think back to my grandparents. And so they went through the Great Depression on the farm. And so they would keep scrap iron and steel and things so that they would have it later in case they needed it.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the mentality sometimes of, well, I might need that sometime. And so sometimes I get decision fatigue on what should I keep and what should I let go, because there's been times that I kept something and 5 years later, I actually needed that thing
Oh.
because it fixed something. And so that was probably a bad reinforcer to some of my decision making. And so, that's especially, you drive by a farm and you see equipment parked in the fence line
Right.
because I've got a 12-row cultivator. Well, the science and the technology, we haven't cultivated with that cultivator probably since 1985, right? But I still have that cultivator just in case someday I want to go cultivate my crops.
I think I saw that one. Is that the one where all the grass has grown up in it? Because,
Yes.
when you let my
Yeah.
nephew come out and check everything
Right.
out, he was pretty excited about that. And I'm like, that one doesn't look like it's moved in a bit.
There was a whole
Um,
row of them. There's actually a
yeah,
whole row
yeah,
of them
yeah.
there, of stuff that we haven't used for
Right,
probably a decade, but
right,
we may, right?
right,
And so it's
right,
really kind of a struggle as practices change, and that's on a bigger scale, right?
right.
On a smaller scale, we think about what we do in our basements, or like you talked about,
Oh gosh.
storage units.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have a couple hundred acres I can store stuff on, so it's easier to
To
keep stuff
keep stuff.
around, right?
Yeah.
But there comes a
Well,
point when I want to get rid of stuff too, and I do think that plays into it for a lot of people, is because you just get overwhelmed with, well, I
mm.
don't know what to get rid of, and so then folks just keep everything.
Oh yeah. And I come from a long line of family who keeps everything. And so it has been my husband came from a family who did not keep things, and I'm in a family that did keep things. So talk about some marriage strife from the get-go. We were the keepers, he was not the keepers. And in my family, we have two kinds of keepers. We have the collectors that are like, well, all of this furniture belonged to so and so. So we can't get rid of that stuff because it was so and so's, even though so and so's long gone and nobody likes this furniture, but we have to keep it because it belonged to so and so. And then we also kind of have some tendencies toward hoarding, of just collecting random nonsense, just nonsense that is costly and we've spent a lot of money on. There's that whole group of people that, well, I spent money on that, so we can't get rid of it because I spent money on it. And even though you shouldn't have spent it in the first place, then we really don't need it today. And so we've got two kinds of family. So I come legit in this space. So today's conversation is not from one who has conquered this, because this is an ongoing process for me. I'll just be honest. I like a good box. I'll keep boxes because I'm like, this is a nice box. I might need this box. And I had to clean out a closet not too long back because I think that keep a nice box turned into, I don't know, 25, 30 boxes. It was one whole side of a closet. And I was trying to convince my husband that I needed more shelves in the closet. And he's like, how about I come look and see what's in the closet first before we build something? And I'm like, no. So I waited till he left town for something. And then I cleaned the closet because I knew good and well his cleaning would be much worse. He's a much deeper purge kind of guy. And things that need to disappear just disappear. And so I was like, no, I'll handle it. And by and gosh, I did not need more shelves when I was done, because I had just collected stuff and it wasn't useful stuff. So let's talk about the data. We can show the data. The research shows that it actually impacts your brain and your body when you have too much stuff. Jason, talk to us about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, anecdotally, I can also tell you that my wife gets stressed out by having like too much stuff in the living room. She likes it to be very clean, simple. She doesn't like, all the things and the doodads and whatever, because it collects dust. It just creates more work. It's all of those things
That's right.
that just aren't helpful. And so, too much stuff on the walls even, just takes away for her, it creates negative energy. Right. And so we see some of those studies that show us, I can tell you that, kind of what I've learned is as I go to, different places, or you go to Airbnbs in some places, I find the ones more relaxing that are very simple, and so I can tell in my own mood when I go someplace and it's just very simple, but looks nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's less stressful than someplace that just has a lot of stuff. And so I was just in an Airbnb that looked like my grandma's house. It had a lot of stuff, right?
You're just like, ooh,
I was like,
lots of stuff.
wow, this is
Yeah.
a very different experience. And so,
Yeah.
as we look at some of the different data out there, research has shown us environmentally, those factors
Mm.
play a lot into how we experience the world around us. And when there's just all that stuff, that clutter, it's like our brain is cluttered as well.
Yeah.
And so I can also tell you the inverse of that would be, I have a 17-year-old son who has no idea how to organize himself on a given day. His
Mm.
room is a complete disaster. Like,
Mm.
Here's your clean clothes, and they're a big pile on the floor next to the dirty clothes. So he doesn't know what's ever clean or dirty, right?
A
And so
mystery.
we don't know where we went wrong in helping him to organize his life. But I think partly that's how his brain thinks,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not organized.
Yeah.
And so that's not helpful in his life at
No.
all, because the floor of his room is representational of how he manages other
Yeah.
things sometimes. And so, as I think about this, that's the parallel that I think we can put to as we think about hoarding, as we think about clutter, as we think about all of those things,
Right.
is that's how you manage your environment. So if your physical environment is also then going to be reflective of your emotional environment.
Right. And we'll talk about some stories here in a minute with my family. And they literally get stuck. Their brain shuts down because to what you said about decisions, they don't know what to do first. And so it just becomes overwhelming to try to clean or fix things because they just don't see the whole picture. And so they get stuck and then make no decisions, which just makes it all more cluttered. And I've been able to help in that space because I don't feel the same way about clutter. So because of that, we'll talk about that in a second. But my own self, if I have clutter like on my desk or whatever, it becomes where I procrastinate. It cracks me up. So instead of doing the tough work I need to do, the thought producing work, if there's a pile of stuff or there's just stuff around, I will stop and go clean it in order to avoid doing the work I actually need to do. It is that bothersome to me that if I have other things line of sight, then I just am like, I can't focus. And that's what the research shows. There's literally research that shows people lose their focus because of clutter and just too much going on around. Our house is very simple as well, because that's actually my husband more so than me. My office has more of my little taste of extra. But because of that, we have people that come and stay with us and they're like, oh my gosh, this place is so peaceful. It's so relaxing. And it's because it's the way it's structured. It is definitely that, to your point. It's not the Airbnb with all the tchotchkes that you're just like, whoa, not that. And so you hear that from people, and that is what the research shows. So what we're talking about today, we're going to have a lot of notes for you in the podcast show notes where you can go look it up. If you don't believe us, go read about it, because people sometimes think more is better and more is not better. And a trend we're going to talk about right now with the data is hoarding. And hoarding is becoming more and more common in our country, and it has stems of anxiety and stems of obsessive compulsive disorder, of feeling like getting more is going to somehow fill a void or a gap or something in your life. And so, Jason, what are some of those hoarding facts that you've looked into?
Yeah, I mean, so hoarding, it's present as many as 1 in 20 people.
Wow.
Right? Serious hoarding problems, 1 in 50 people. Average age of someone who hoards is about 50, right? So you have some that start that behavior as teenagers, but you really start to see it as people get older.
Wow.
And as you see individuals who kind of start to then dig into some of those things. And, professionally, I've worked with folks, in the crisis space that can't even walk through their homes anymore,
Yeah.
because their belief that they just need more stuff. And so, if you ever go to auctions very often, you can kind of get a flavor of folks who are just kind of out of control in obtaining things. And so that's an extreme, right?
Right.
However, what are those aspects do you see happening in people? What are other areas you see folks? And so some folks, you wouldn't call them a hoarder, but we all know folks who like to collect things, right? And so, a good example back in the day was Longaberger baskets, right?
Yeah.
Some people would have Longaberger baskets everywhere, which I think we still have some in our basement. And that was a great example as we think about clutter, as why do we still have those, right? Because they're not really
Those
a
are
thing
impossible
anymore.
to dust. They're just impossible to dust.
Right. And they're not worth anything anymore, right? There used to be a value to them. People would collect them. And so, what's the balance between being a collector of something and it just being clutter and taking up space? So if it brings you enjoyment, then it's a good thing, right? But if it's just a thing you hold on to, then what's the purpose in it? I think that's really the conversation here is, we can look at the data, but it really comes down to what is it doing? How does it impact your life? And what does it mean to you?
Yeah. Coming from a long line of collectors, I've gone through this process with myself, mostly because my husband has pushed me to, and I'm grateful because I've grown so much. But one of the things we had collections of as kids is I was a big sports person. So I had trophies, ribbons, trophies, medals, crap, just tons of it. And I finally found somebody online that talked about what you could do with that. So I kept one or two that were my favorite. They were like the biggest events or the things that I cared about the most. I kept a couple of those. And then I took pictures of like, put it all on the ground and took pictures of all the rest of it. And then I don't know where it all went away. And I'm grateful. I'm just grateful that it's gone, because it was like, there was just stuff. If you're out there and you're like, you're a stuff collector, sometimes you need help. And that's where my husband has been for me, is kind of that extra push to like, really, do we really need these things? And for me, sometimes it is hard, because I am legit, this is my DNA through and through and through. And it's hard to sometimes go through it, but I feel so much better afterwards. And so there's some things that you feel better once it's gone. Now, I just recently purged a closet, and last week I was like, I really wish I still had XYZ shirts. I had 3 or 4 of them, because I've changed now to something where I need to be more dressed up each day. And I had given them away in the season when I basically could wear yoga pants as a consultant for most of my life. And now I can't wear yoga pants to the office. That doesn't look right. And so all of a sudden I was like, dang it. But on the flip side, now it gives me the opportunity to replace them with probably something much more stylish that is much more today. And I'm not looking like I'm walking from the 80s. And so it's going to be good. But it did occur to me, I'm like, crap, I should have kept that. And so there's that balance, like you say, right? For all the things I've probably gotten rid of, that's probably only happened a couple of times in my life where I really needed something I got rid of, and I could get it again. It's okay. But you're right. It's like, but I might need it. And so you think you have to keep it, right? Is that you just might need it. So we start thinking about family. So here's another thing that worked. I have nieces and a sister who have a lot of anxiety in their lives, and stuff is a huge driver of anxiety. And so a couple of things I figured out that worked, which is kind of funny, we sort of stumbled upon it, is we worked, and we had kids that were steps as far as sizes went for a long time. And the oldest one would grow out of stuff, and it could fit the second one, and then it might fit the third one. So we sort of worked through this process, and it was Aunt Renee's job to come over and help them when we go through the closets. And we did 2 things. The kids sat on a bed, never had to do anything, but they had to tell me, would they wear it ever? Do they need to try it on? Or they're never, ever going to wear it? And I'd have 3 piles. And so we would do that, and then move it from the biggest kid's room to the second room and go through it again. Never, ever going to wear it. I might need to try it on, or I would like to keep it. And we'd do that all the way down. And then we'd get it to the last one, and then out the door. And my sister had a few rules, because there were keepsakes along the way that had to go into the tubs that go into the basement, which is fine. But it became so much less. But once they could see you could just see them relax more in their bedrooms once you kind of helped them do it, because they were stuck. To your point, there was too many decisions, and their mind got so stuck in just so much. So sometimes it takes hiring somebody. I hired an organizer once in my life. We were losing the mail. I was a legislator. This is a funny story, but we were losing the mail. The mail would come to the house, and bills would not get paid. And back then, some things couldn't be paid online. One was a water bill. So we kept getting this notice for our water to get turned off. But the mail would come in and get sat in a pile, and then we wouldn't process it. And I was living in Cedar Rapids, and we were coming to Des Moines, and we just wouldn't process the mail. We just didn't. And so I hired an organizer to help me figure out a system for that process, because A, we could afford not to lose our water, but B, what in the world? I remember finding a pile of mail that it was like in the summertime, and it was a Valentine's Day card, and that was where one of the bills was in that pile. And I'm like, so and so sometimes you just have to get help. And some of the tools I now can use to help others with their transition, I had to learn by somebody coming in and showing me a step or two. So I don't know, Jason, have you ever had somebody kind of help you walk through processes with clutter? I mean, with all the stuff on the farm, I mean, I don't even know where you begin. How do you decide what you need or keep or get rid of, or are you still just stuck in keeping it all?
Well, I mean, that's the struggle I have. And so that's why I end up with some large items. Like I'm emotionally attached to my grandfather's 1948 Dodge pickup.
Okay.
It hasn't run in 2 decades, but it's a beautiful old antique truck. And so it's an emotional attachment, right? And so I'm keeping it. I can keep it inside. Is it taking up valuable space? Probably, because I have other equipment I should be able to put inside. And so some of those things I struggle with. I also have the original forge and anvil and tools my great grandfather used on the railroad when he settled here. And so some of those they're antiques, and they have family value. And so, I struggle with things like that because I have been a blacksmith before at Living History Farms. I've done some of that work. I know how to use the forge and use those original tools. So they have value to me. Are they worth anything to anyone else? Probably not. Right. And are my kids going to want those someday? Probably not. And then they'll just go for scrap iron. Right. And so
Mm,
I think that's where the challenge comes in, right? Is where do you draw the line for things that you're emotionally connected to that may not, that other people be like, why do you keep that stuff around? That's kind of strange. And so while I have the opportunity to keep them, I will. Now, I will tell you on a farm, what we do when we want to get rid of stuff is we have a bonfire by the ravine, right?
huh?
So there's
Wow.
sometimes you just purge and you load up the skid loader bucket and the tractor bucket and you start hauling loads back, right? And then you have a big bonfire.
Mm,
Because that's the challenge sometimes is people don't have anywhere to take stuff, right? Like
mhm,
your garbage can's only so big at once a week.
mhm,
And if you've been collecting stuff for a couple of decades,
mhm.
it can be very expensive to get rid of things. And so, thinking about there are barriers too
Right.
sometimes that you get so far in, it gets overwhelming.
Right. Well, and thinking through, we've been talking about estates a lot this last month, just with the aging parent thing and whatever. And I've got stories of my own family, but in other families where they started collecting stuff. Like as somebody passed away, they started buying things, and they may not have even opened them from like Amazon. Right, the boxes are all there. Well, they had this inheritance of selling the farm, of having money, and now the mom has passed, and now the kids are thinking there's an inheritance, but it got spent on stuff, just stuff. And so they're trying to do a tag sale to try to recoup some monies for their inheritance, but it's one of those lack of communication things, and they weren't paying attention to what mom was doing with money, and now mom is gone, and so now they have this estate, and now they're like, what in the world? And it's not what they thought it was, and the money's not there. And that's a big thing. I have a family situation, they hide money in the stuff. I know you've talked about that. You had a family friend that did the same. And so you can't even get rid of the stuff because now you got to look for the cash that's stuck in the stuff. And what a weird mess that this has all become. And it's all stems from anxiety and this obsession, compulsion stuff of not wanting to deal with that. So instead of dealing with our anxieties and try to work through the why we keep stuff and doing the mental health work that needs to be done, instead it's all turning into this big mess. So Jason, tell us that story about your friend that had the money stuffed in places.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
common.
oh, it's
Common.
very common. And so, I had a friend who was made an executor of an estate. There was no family. And it ends up that the person had 3 or 4 different houses and had hoarded different items in all of those
Wow.
things, from Christmas items to just stuff everywhere. And intermixed with all the stuff was cash in between pages of magazines, in between envelopes.
Yeah.
So pretty much everything had to be gone through. It took almost 16 months to
Wow.
go through and sell all of the items. It was a full-time job of
Right.
just to figure out, and this person had donated all of the stuff to 7 charities. And so someone actually had to go through all
Oh,
of this
wow.
stuff and sell it. I mean, and so think about what it did to the other people that were left behind.
Yeah.
And so that was very kind, my friend doing this. But those types of things happen. And so,
Yeah.
having conversations, doing as much as you can. One of the things that my mom and dad did is when they moved from the farm and sold their acreage and went into a condo, is they kind of themselves took it on to purge of all the stuff, right? They
Mm-hmm.
kind of, it was like it was all new furniture. They kind of just did the whole start over thing and took the things that were meaningful to them, but said, we're just going to go ahead and take care of the stuff for you because we see all this stuff happening with some of our friends, and
Right.
their kids, and we won't do that to you. There's
Right.
days I want to do that to my kids though. So, I'm on the balancing act of like, that is the ultimate get back. If you don't like your kids, then you do
Oh,
that to them.
geez. You
But,
like your kids.
I think thinking about what you want to do and how do you have those conversations ahead of time, because there may be some of those things that are emotionally connections for family of things that they would like to have, or pictures or things that they want to have as memories. And so sometimes it's better to give those things while you're still alive,
Right.
as opposed to waiting. And so if,
Right.
if something brings someone joy, then let's declutter it, and then let's find a different way of going about it.
Right. And we've got that situation in our family, and there's, kids going off to college who could use the money for college. And instead, family want to hold it until they pass and give it to you as an inheritance. Well, you may not really need it then. And it's like, there's like some weird thought processes about that, or the fear that they might need it to care for themselves. So therefore they can't give it now because they might need it. And if you've got people in that space, it comes back to mental health, right? So folks that are in that good mindset that maybe don't have this anxiety and stuff, they can have these conversations and be planful. Sometimes though, with mental health that goes unchecked, that's just not in their brain power capacity to think through some of these things. And it just becomes a challenge all the way around. So this week, I'm just going to give you a self-care tip. And this is one of the things that we do to preclude clutter at my house. And it's not a big thing. It's a small thing, but it's been remarkable as a small little rule. And that kind of carries over to other parts of my life. But we have a rule that we're not buying any more hangers for the closet. We're not. So if we have so many clothes hung up that we are out of hangers, it is time to get rid of things. And so we have just come to an agreement, and this kind of goes now with shoes, with different things, that when one thing new comes in, one thing goes out. So I know my husband, gets a new pair of shoes. The next pair of shoes goes to the outside. Maybe they become the lawn shoes or the mowing shoes or whatever. And they just sort of have this progression. The new shoes are for this, the backup shoes are for this. The next pair of shoes are the outside shoes for the garage or whatever. And it just keeps it simple for us. We don't have to argue about it anymore. We don't have to decide anymore. It's just like, oh, we're out of hangers. All your hangers are out. So which pieces are you going to get rid of? And then we don't even have to discuss it. It's just this kind of ongoing rolling, take some stuff to Goodwill or give it away or whatever it is we're going to do. And I have found that to really help because, like I said, I by nature am a collector. And so, to have some of those kind of self-tip predetermined rules in my life is helpful, because then if I have too much stuff, it's not an argument anymore. It's just like, oh, I'm out of hangers. I guess it's time to purge again. And so it just helps me stay on track. And so for somebody out there listening, maybe that's something you could think of. And Jason, I don't know, because you like collecting. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have a self-care idea for yourself?
I do. My wife has initiated several times going around the house and putting things in a tub. And if they're not missed in 6 months, or someone always ever went and found the stuff in the tub, then it must mean we can get rid of it because it didn't have value and we didn't need it. So, I think that's a great way. Part of me would keep a secret stash of hangers if I lived in your house, Renee. So I could just add hangers to the closet, because hangers are a problem around our house.
No.
But, I think that it's important to have the conversation, and you're not always going to agree with your spouse or someone you live with or someone when you have the conversations about this. But there's ways that you can help to frame the conversation, and remind people that if it doesn't bring you joy, do you really need it? Right. And so, I think that's the conversation to have.
Yeah. And one more story before I wrap up. We moving to a new house can actually help, to your point about your family downsizing and whatever. There were boxes apparently that moved from one of our moves to a different move. And when we moved here in 2015, still hadn't been opened from the previous location. And I think we lived in that location, I don't know, 15, 18 years. I don't know. So my husband just got rid of them. And once I said, well, what was in them? He's like, you don't want to know. And it's to your point, right? The bucket for 6 months, right? I don't know what was in it, but for me, that's less stressful in some ways because I don't have to think about it. He just was like, we never opened them, however many years we were at this location. This is silly. And so he just got rid of them for me. And so really, it is helpful to have a partner or somebody in your life that kind of looks at it different. So today we're talking about more stuff. And through the holidays, I bet you're up to your eyeballs and stuff. And Christmas is coming up around the corner. More stuff for you. So what are you going to do about that? Are you going to just let more stuff come in and clutter up your life more? Or are you going to think about, well, maybe all the stuff coming in this year, some stuff's got to go out the backside so that I feel a little more balanced. So we gave you some data about hoarding because that's becoming a more important problem in our country. More and more people struggle in that space with anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, and some tips and tricks on what you can do to be able to stem this challenge. So join us again next week. We're going to be talking about setting up goals for the next few weeks, talking about a new year and a new you. We're almost to that season. So have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.